Hey, this is the Baitmaster Fishing Podcast. I'm your host, Noah Boyd. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about all the aspects of fishing, everything from first bite to in the boat. Let's dive in.
We went for each other like a bullet from a gun. Faster than the sheriff's drawing, hotter than the sun. Didn't see it coming lately, I've been on the run. You know you've seen my face before, so let me tell you.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Baitmaster Fishing Podcast. I'm your host, Noah Boyd. In our previous episode, we discussed what a beginner's fishing looks like with our friend Rustin and got some really deep conversation going about some various techniques. And make sure to go check out that episode. For today's topic, we're going to be talking about bait and lures. And this is going to be specifically for like freshwater. So if you're fishing in lakes, if you're fishing like reservoirs, that type of stuff. So first we'll talk about bait. Usually whenever I use bait, I'm like jigging. So and what jigging is like you just drop and pull up, drop and pull up. And so usually you're using like a spinning reel for this. So usually I'll use night crawlers, which are just worms, for my bait, and then sometimes I'll use leeches, but it's kind of just your personal preference on what you want to use, honestly. So um and so when you're jigging, what you attach those to is something called a jig head. And so it's basically like, if you listen to the last episode, it's like we talked about it a little bit. It's basically this like little ball with painted on it. It looks like an eye. And then attached to it, it's got a hook on it. And so usually when I use bait and when I'm jigging, I'll attach my bait to a jig head. And so just for that, it's kind of just like, for good fishing, usually I just have to find like my lucky color for jig heads, or like my lucky jig head type. Like I have a very specific like jig head that I like using, and it kind of just works for me every time. So kind of just like that. Usually when I'm jigging, or whenever you're jigging, just in general, you don't want to just like drop it and let it go all the way to the bottom and sit on there. You kind of want to let it drop, hit the bottom of the floor at the bottom there, and then you want to raise it up just a tiny bit so that the fish can get to it and see it. Um, but just for like lucky jig head type stuff, you really want to just find what works for you personally. Like that's what there isn't really like a right way to jig, or like, or I guess there is, but it's kind of just what you want to do and what works for you and your personal preference overall. So usually when you're jigging and using like a jig head, you'll find walleye biting, and on occasion I've caught like some bass that bite on a jig head, but it's usually just like any fish that is looking for a quick bite to eat or just looking for a worm. Um, so yeah, that's for baits. Let's get into lures. So I'll talk a little bit about lures. Some of my favorite lures to use are stuff called rattle traps. So it's like a plastic fish looking thing, and it's got like these rocks inside of it. And I don't even know, but it's like it shakes whenever it shakes in the water when you're reeling it, and it makes the fish really up and pissed off. So um, those are really good. They're fun too because the fish hate them, so they'll hit them as hard as they can. Like bass, I've caught so many bass with a rattle trap; it's insane. Not ever any largemouth, but specifically just smallmouth for rattle traps. You can catch really anything on a rattle trap. So I catch pike, and then I'll catch. Um, I've caught some walleye on a rattle trap, and then I've caught a lot of bass on rattle traps too. So they're really fun, and I like them a lot. That's kind of just your personal preference too, though. Is kind of just whatever works for you, and like what you want to do, and just your color, and like what the fish will be able to see, and what they really hate, and they'll hit really hard. So it's kind of just whatever you want. Personally, I like a purple one with like gold or some type of red rattle trap. So it's really easy to see, or like it reflects the sun pretty good. So, but it's all about what you want, really. Um, Rattle traps are really fun. I like them a lot, and I think just the type of fish that they like catch, I think it's just a really good lure overall. So if I were to rate it like out of 10, I'd probably give it like a solid 8. My only problem with them is sometimes they're really hard to get out, like in the fish. If the fish is like on it, it's really hard to get the hook out, and so that's kind of because usually most rattle traps are, I think, 3 pronged hooks. So yeah, and then another thing I have is they get stuck really easy. So if you're fishing in like weeds or anything like that, and like lakes and stuff, like when I'm up in Canada, there's weeds everywhere, so it's kind of impossible to like it's not impossible, but you have to use them in very specific areas. Otherwise, they get stuck a lot, and it like takes on weeds, and it just sucks. But it's whatever you want, and it's just whatever works for you personally. But speaking of weeds, another lure that works really good are top water lures. So these are like your black sheep of your lures. They really can just be anything. So sometimes they're like little metal ones with like spinny propeller things, and it makes noise on the top, and it like moves the water around and acts like it's splashing and stuff, and the pike will really hit that hard. Another type is like stuff that looks like animals, so like frogs or like small ducks or rats. So they're really kind of all over the board when it comes to that, but I think they're because they're so like unique and like very diverse in what they look like. I think they're really good, and it's kind of just like you can use really anything and see if it works good, and just kind of like use use it and see if it's good for fishing or like whatever the fish are going for. But the animal ones are cool because like if you have a frog or a duck, most fish, if they're like angry, like bass or like I don't think I've had a bass hit, but definitely pike. Pike like to hit the top water like animal ones because they like a bat or a pike will eat a baby duck, and it's like insane. And they'll just the top waters just float on the edge of the water, and they float, so like you literally can see it when it's coming towards you, and a pike will just come up and snatch it like right out of the water and like go up in the air. It's crazy. Um, but for like the animal ones, I really like those. I have a frog, and I think I have 3 frogs and 2 ducks. So it's kind of just like really diverse, I feel like. And then for like the metal ones with the propellers that splash water, um, I think I have like 6 or 7 of those. Those are really good. They're single hook and like single prong hook, so they're definitely harder to catch fish on, but or not harder to catch fish on, but it's harder to set the hook. So, but those are really good because they're easy to see. They're really fun. Um, it kind of just depends on what you want. So, and then there's another type of top water. There's the propeller is underwater, so it like reflects the light everywhere, and that's really cool because it like just shows or like it's really easy for the fish to see because fish like it's really dark if you look in the water down there. Like it's really hard to see, and so like especially in the weeds, it's good to have like top water stuff or like metal top water that is easily findable so you can catch good fish, especially in there. Because like pike love to hide in weeds and like just swim around in there. Usually it's walleye that are out in the open, like on little mounds under the water, because they like to lay on the mounds. So yeah, um, I think my favorite top water, if I had one, is probably. Hmm. I have to say it's one of I'd say it's probably my green frog because it has like rotating legs at the end of it, so it like splashes some water but also floats at the same time. So I really like that one. And then for my metal, there's like this purple one that I really love to use, and it has a propeller on the top, and so it splashes water when it's like on top of the water. And so I really like that one too. But it's really all about just like what works for you. Like I feel like this just fishing in general is just like finding what works and using it like even not everything works for every single person. Like Some people don't like using rattle traps because it doesn't they don't do well with them, or like some people don't like jigging, even though like jigging like I don't like jigging as much as I like casting. But I know, but like when we're on our fishing trips, you have to jig because that's what catches your food. Because we do shore lunch and we catch walleye, and then we'll eat it on like some random in the middle of nowhere island, just like kind of we make potatoes with it, and then we fry the walleye, and it's literally like some of the greatest fish I've ever had. It's so good. Like I can't even tell y'all how good it is. You just have to like experience it. So just like overall, just experiencing what works and experiencing what's good for you. But overall, I'd just say like jig heads are really good for jigging, and like hence the name. It's all about your technique with jigging too. Like you don't want to just like let it sit there and do nothing. You kind of want to let it bob up and down so it looks like something weird down there underwater to the fish. And he's like, "What is that?" And he's like, "Yep, you're dead." Just kidding. Uh, but it's all about technique for jigging, and like not only that, but like the type of jig heads you use. And so I think just like that, keeping that in mind will help you to be successful when you do jig. And then as for like other types of lures, there's like rattle traps. Like the types that I use are rattle traps and top waters. And so rattle traps are really fun. They're kind of very specific as to what they are. Like there's not a lot of diversity that you get with like top water is very diverse. Rattle trap is very not diverse. They're very like the only thing that's like different about them and unique is like the colors and stuff and the type of hooks. But like everything that I've seen, top waters, you can really do anything with them. There's tons and tons and tons of them that you can get. And it's kind of just whatever works for you, whatever you like, whatever you find is like, oh my God, that is like catching fish galore. Or like, oh, well, this kind of sucks. Not a fish. Not a fish is not going to go and look for this. So it's kind of just whatever you want personally. But um, overall, if I were to rank them in terms of like what I like the most and what I don't like the most, I'd say probably topwater is my favorite, and then rattle traps are like my second favorite because those are really fun. And then I also like jig heads, and then I'd say like if I were to rank each of them, I'd probably give a top water like a 9 out of 10. But it kind of just depends. Like metal top waters are really fun, but sometimes they're kind of bad because they like get off the hook. And then rattle traps are also really fun. But the problem with rattle traps in top water is steel. You need like steel line so the fish doesn't bite through your line and you lose your bait. Because like I cannot tell you how many freaking lures I've lost because I didn't use a steel line, and it's literally the worst feeling ever. So you have to get a steel line if you're using rattle traps or if you're using top water. As for like jig heads, you're kind of fine on that because like walleye don't really bite through the line, so it's kind of just you should be good on that. But I'd say if I were the only thing that I like about jig heads and like jigging is I don't have to like tie a steel line every time. But it's also bad because every time you lose a jig head, you have to retie your knot, and so that's just kind of like you 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 take and you give at the same time, and it's kind of just like you lose some things and then you also gain like some good things. So, but for top water, I really like them. Kind of just do whatever you want. It's really fun. I had a top water. I was fishing with a frog. I think 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, and we were in the weeds, like thick weeds, and so like nobody is getting a bite. It's dead quiet. Nothing's happening. We're kind of just hanging out on the boat. It's hot, very hot. And then all of a sudden, I'm reeling in my frog, and out of nowhere, this pike just comes up and freaking slashes it and steals away. And I have to set the hook quickly, otherwise I'm going to lose it. So I set the hook, bring it in, and I think that was my biggest. I think that was my biggest bat or pike that I've recorded. It was like maybe I don't think it was my biggest. It was like one of my bigger ones, but I think it was like 28 or 29 maybe. But it was really good. I don't like eating pike as much as I like walleye, but if you know how to fillet them, they're still pretty good. So it's kind of just whatever. As for like jigging, um, like my jigging technique is usually when I jig, I'll drop it down, I'll raise it about 4 cranks on my reel, and then I'll just let it sit and I'll like bounce it up and down with my rod ever so slightly. So like a little just like it's dancing almost, just like up and up and down until I get a bite. And then I don't think I've ever had much luck with jigging that's like considerable, I guess you could say, but we definitely have gotten some eatable fish that turned out to be really good. So definitely try jigging if you're looking for like walleye. I've caught some bass on jig heads, but not many. And then don't use jig heads if you're looking for like pike and stuff, because I don't think I've ever caught a pike on a jig head, like ever. It's just not something that happens. So overall, I just think it's like do the jig head, try different lures out, see what you like. Also bait. I use night crawlers, which are worms, and then leeches. But it's also you got to keep the problem with leeches. You got to keep them alive. You can't keep up like worms. You can keep them in dirt. Leeches have to stay in water, otherwise they'll end up dead. So there's this little tub you can get, and it has water in it, and it like switches out the water, and you can keep it on the side of your boat and keep it in the water so that the leeches don't die. But also when you bring it up, it holds water in it so that the leeches stay cool, like when you're moving spots or anything like that. So I just think that overall, it's kind of personal preference for what you like using, but that's kind of my take on what you should use and what's actually good. So that's all I got for you today, folks. Thanks for listening. Make sure to rate and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts, and also go follow our Instagram page. That'll be in the description below. And remember, just cast your line and go fishing. Thank you.